The Council sent a threat. The Empire demanded surrender. Earth replied with coordinates. Far above the blue and white world called Earth, a single alien ship hung in the dark, silent and still. It had arrived 3 days ago, dropping out of a tunnel in space that no human telescope had ever detected forming. The ship was long and thin, shaped like a blade, and it gave off a low hum that human sensors picked up as a strange song, almost like a whale call stretched across 1,000 octaves. Nobody on Earth knew what it wanted. Nobody on Earth knew what it was. Inside that ship, a being named Vor Ashen stood before a wide window of dark glass, looking down at the planet below. He was tall, taller than most humans, with gray skin that shimmered faintly under the ship's lights, and eyes that were large and black, built for seeing in the dim light of his homeworld. He was a speaker for the Kelvax Empire, one of the oldest and largest powers in this part of the galaxy, and he had seen many worlds like this one, young worlds, loud worlds, worlds full of creatures who did not yet understand how small they were. Behind him stood his aide, a smaller Kelvax named Dree, who held a data slate covered in flowing script. "Report," Vor Ashen said, without turning around. "The scans are complete, Speaker," Dree said. "This species calls itself human. They are young, technologically speaking. They have only just begun to leave their own solar system. Their ships are slow. Their weapons are primitive by our standards. But what?" Dree hesitated. "But their history is strange, Speaker. They fight each other constantly. Not just small fights. Wars that span their entire planet. Millions of their own kind killed by their own kind, again and again, throughout their history. And yet they keep building, keep growing, keep pushing forward, even after losing so much." Vor Ashen turned now, his black eyes narrowing slightly. "A violent species." "Yes, Speaker." "Violent species are easy to conquer," Vor Ashen said. "They spend their strength on each other. By the time we arrive, they are already weakened, already used to loss. We simply have to convince them that resistance is pointless, and they surrender, the same way conquered species have surrendered for the last 4,000 years of Kelvax expansion." "Yes, Speaker," Dree said again, though something in her voice was uncertain. Vor Ashen did not notice, or did not care. He had done this 100 times, on 100 worlds. The pattern never changed. A scout ship arrived. It observed. It sent a message demanding surrender, offering peace in exchange for submission, offering war in exchange for defiance. Almost always, the world surrendered within days. A few worlds resisted for a short while, until the Empire's full fleet arrived and showed them what defiance truly cost. No world had ever refused the Empire and survived to tell the story afterward as a victory. That was simply how the galaxy worked. The Kelvax Empire was not the largest power in the galaxy, but it was old, and it was patient, and it had a fleet numbering in the tens of thousands of ships. It answered to a wider body called the Council, an alliance of empires and powerful species who had, centuries ago, agreed to divide the galaxy peacefully among themselves rather than fight endless wars. New species who wished to join galactic society had to prove themselves worthy, had to submit to inspection, had to accept a place in the hierarchy that the Council had built. Most species, when faced with fleets larger than anything they could imagine, chose to accept their place quietly. It was, after all, simple logic. Why die fighting a war you cannot win? Vor Ashen walked to a control console and activated a wide screen showing a map of Earth, its cities lit up like scattered stars across the dark shape of the continents. So many lights. So many people, crowded together in these little clusters, unaware that a decision was about to be made about their entire future by a being none of them had ever seen. "Draft the message," Vor Ashen said. "The standard terms: surrender of Earth's governments to Council authority, disarmament of all military forces, acceptance of Council law and Council governance. In exchange, they may keep their world, their culture, and their lives, so long as they serve the Empire in whatever way we require. And if they refuse?" Vor Ashen almost smiled, though the expression looked strange on his narrow gray face. "They will not refuse. No one refuses. But if they do, the fleet is already 3 jumps away, ready to move on my order. We will make an example of them, quickly and quietly, so that the council sees the matter is handled. Dree bowed her head and began preparing the message. Down on Earth, the arrival of the alien ship had already changed everything. Governments that had spent decades arguing over borders and trade and politics suddenly found themselves staring at the same impossible truth. They were not alone. And whoever, or whatever, was up there was clearly far more advanced than anything humanity had built. In an underground command center beneath the city of Geneva, dozens of representatives from countries around the world had gathered, along with military officers, scientists, and translators who had, over the past 3 days, worked without sleep, trying to understand the strange signals the ship had been sending. Among them was a woman named Elena Cade, a former fighter pilot who now served as the head of what had once been a small international space defense agency, an agency that, until 3 days ago, most of the world had considered a waste of money. Now, everyone wanted to hear what she had to say. They've stopped just sending signals, Elena said, standing at the head of a long table covered in monitors and maps. Our people managed to decode the last transmission fully. It's a message, and it's addressed to all of us. A murmur ran through the room. An old general with silver hair, a man named Marcus Webb, leaned forward. What does it say? Elena tapped a control, and the message appeared on the main screen, translated into English, though copies had already gone out in every major language on Earth. The words were simple, and cold, and absolute. We are the Kelvax Empire, servants of the Galactic Council. We have observed your species. You are young, disorganized, and violent. Your continued independent existence threatens the stability of this region of space. You will submit to Council authority. You will disarm your militaries. You will accept governance under Kelvax law. You have 72 of your hours to respond. Refusal will be considered an act of war against the Empire, and the Empire does not lose wars. Silence filled the room after the words finished displaying. Somewhere down the table, a young diplomat from Japan let out a breath she had been holding. They want us to surrender, said a man near the end of the table, a British minister named Charles Hale. Just like that, no negotiation, no explanation of who they even are, beyond a name. That's exactly what they want, Elena said. A quiet surrender, no fuss, no war, just us, giving up everything, and them taking over. General Webb rubbed his jaw, his eyes hard. And if we refuse? Then, according to the message, it's war, Elena said. War against a species that can cross to our solar system in ships we can't even detect coming until they're already here. War against something that calls itself an empire, backed by something called a council, whatever that is. The room fell into arguing almost immediately. Some voices called for immediate surrender, pointing out that humanity had no way of knowing the true size of the force behind this ship, no way of knowing what kind of weapons it carried, no way of knowing if resistance would simply mean the deaths of billions of people for nothing. Other voices, quieter but firm, said that surrender was not something humanity should accept without even trying to understand what they were surrendering to. Elena let the arguing continue for a while before raising her hand for silence. It took a moment, but the room quieted. I want to say something, she said, and I want everyone here to actually listen, because I think it matters more than anything else we've said in the last hour. She looked around the table, at the tired faces, the frightened faces, the angry faces. We don't know what's out there, not really. We don't know how big this empire is, or how big this council is, or how many worlds like ours have already surrendered before us. But we do know one thing. We know what we are. We are a species that has never, not once in our entire history, given up without a fight. We've fought each other for thousands of years, yes, and that's not something to be proud of. But it's also made us tougher than almost anything else that has ever existed on this planet. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars that killed tens of millions of us, and we always came back. We always rebuilt. That single ship up there has been watching us for 3 days. It thinks it understands us because it's read our history and seen our wars. But I don't think it understands us at all. I don't think it understands what happens when a species like us is backed into a corner. General Webb nodded slowly. She's right. Every empire in our own history that thought conquering us would be easy learned the hard way that it wasn't. Every single time. "So what are you suggesting?" Charles Hale asked. "That we fight? With what? We don't even have working weapons that can reach orbit reliably, let alone fight a ship that can cross the galaxy." "I'm not suggesting we fight today," Elena said. "I'm suggesting we don't surrender today either. I'm suggesting we buy time. I'm suggesting we show them that we're not afraid, even if, quietly, some of us are terrified." The debate continued long into the night, and then into the next day, and the day after that. Word of the alien message had, of course, leaked to the public within hours, and the entire world watched, waited, and argued right alongside their leaders. Riots broke out in some cities, fueled by panic. In others, strange, unexpected calm settled over the streets, as if people had simply decided that panicking would not help. Religious leaders across every faith spoke to their followers, offering comfort, offering explanations, offering hope. Scientists around the world worked without rest, trying to learn everything they could about the ship in orbit, though it gave away almost nothing. On the 72nd hour, as the deadline approached, the leaders of Earth's nations, gathered together in a way they had never truly gathered before, prepared their answer. It was Elena Cade, standing before a camera that would broadcast to the alien ship and to the entire world at once, who delivered it. She did not offer surrender. She did not offer a plea for mercy, or a request for more time, or a long explanation of humanity's worth. Instead, she looked into the camera, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her chest, and she spoke words that would, in the days and weeks to come, be remembered by billions of people as the moment everything changed. "You gave us a threat," she said. "We're giving you an answer." On the screen behind her, a set of numbers appeared. Coordinates. Not the coordinates of Earth, which the aliens already had. Not coordinates of surrender, or coordinates of a peace meeting. Coordinates of a location far out at the edge of the solar system, near the rings of Saturn, where, unknown to the wider galaxy, humanity had spent the last several years quietly building something the world's governments had kept secret, even from most of their own people. A project born from decades of paranoia about exactly this kind of moment ever arriving. "If you want us," Elena said, "come and find us there, and bring everything you've got, because we intend to do the same." The transmission ended. Up above, aboard the Kelvax scout ship, Vor Ashen stared at the coordinates on his screen for a long moment, utterly still, his black eyes unreadable. Dree stood beside him, her mouth slightly open, unsure of what she was witnessing. "Speaker," she said quietly, "in 4,000 years, has any species ever done this?" Vor Ashen did not answer immediately. He simply stared at the numbers, at the strange, small, defiant reply from a world that, by every measure his people used, should have already surrendered. "No," he finally said, "never." He turned away from the window, his mind already working through what would come next, already calculating how many ships he would need to request, already wondering, for the first time in his long career, whether the pattern he had trusted for so many years was about to break. Somewhere far below him, on the surface of that blue and white world, humanity waited, together, for the first time in its long and violent history, not divided by borders or old grudges, but united by a single, simple choice. They had chosen not to kneel. And far above, in the cold silence of space, the Kelvax Empire began, slowly and carefully, to prepare for a war it did not yet understand it might lose. Word of the reply spread across Earth within minutes. In New York, in Lagos, in Beijing, in Cairo, in Sao Paulo, people gathered around screens, in the streets, in their homes, watching the same broadcast over and over. Some wept, some cheered, some simply stood in silence, trying to understand what their leaders had just done in their name. There was no going back now. The deadline had passed. The answer had been given. Whatever the Kelvax Empire decided to do next, humanity had made its choice, together, as one world, for perhaps the first time in its entire history. In the underground command center in Geneva, Elena Cade sat down heavily in her chair once the broadcast ended, her hands trembling slightly now that the camera was off. General Webb placed a hand on her shoulder. "That took courage," he said quietly. "It took desperation," Elena replied. "I just hope it wasn't a mistake." Outside, Night was falling over Geneva, the same as it always had. But nothing about this night felt the same as any night before it. Somewhere above the clouds, past the sky, past the edge of everything humanity had ever explored, a decision had been made that would shape the future of an entire species. The Council had sent its threat. The Empire had demanded surrender. And Earth, small, young, and stubborn, had replied with coordinates and a promise, whether the galaxy liked it or not, that humanity did not intend to go quietly into anyone else's empire. The story of what would happen next, the story of Saturn's rings, of hidden fleets, of ancient empires meeting something they had never truly faced before, was only just beginning. 3 days after Earth sent its answer to the stars, the Kelvax scout ship still hung in orbit, silent, watching. Vorashin had not left the observation deck in almost a full day. He stood before the wide window, staring down at the blue world below, turning the strange reply over and over in his mind. Coordinates, not surrender, not pleading. Coordinates, and a promise of resistance. In his long career as a speaker for the Empire, Vorashin had delivered the surrender ultimatum to 11 different species. Every single one had folded before the deadline, offering their governments, their weapons, their futures, in exchange for being allowed to keep breathing under Kelvax rule. He had grown used to the pattern, had come to see it as simple fact, the same way water always flowed downhill. Weaker species did not fight stronger ones. It was not bravery to do so. It was foolishness. And yet here was a species with no starships, capable of true interstellar combat, no weapons that could threaten a Kelvax cruiser, choosing, deliberately, to invite war rather than accept peace under the Empire. Speaker, Dree said, entering the observation deck quietly, the Council relay has responded to our report. They are concerned. Concerned how? They want to know why a Tier 9 species, one so far below Kelvax military strength, would respond this way. Some among the Council administrators suspect a trick, a trap of some kind. They are asking whether we should delay the fleet until we understand what the humans are planning. Vorashin's black eyes narrowed. Delay gives them more time to prepare, whatever they are planning. No, we move forward as scheduled. I have already requested the Second Fleet under Marshal Threx, 12,000 vessels. That is more than enough to end any resistance this species could possibly muster, no matter what they have hidden near their outer planet. Should we not consider... Dree. Vorashin's voice was sharp now. I have served the Empire for over 300 years. I have seen desperate species make desperate gestures before, a show of defiance to make their surrender feel less shameful to themselves, followed, when the fleet actually arrives, by hurried terms of peace. This is nothing more than that, a performance for their own people, nothing more. Dree bowed her head, though something in her posture suggested she was not entirely convinced. She had read the files on human history more closely than her superior had. She had seen the wars that lasted decades, the species that had, in the space of only 200 years, gone from riding on animals to building machines that could fly beyond their own atmosphere. Something about the pattern did not sit comfortably with her, though she could not yet say exactly what. Far below, deep beneath the surface of the Earth, and far out at the edge of the solar system near the icy rings of Saturn, humanity was not performing. It was working. The location Elena Cade had given in her broadcast was real, and it was the best-kept secret in the history of the human race. 12 years earlier, following the discovery of strange radio signals from deep space that had, for a brief and frightening month, convinced the world's scientists that contact with another species might be imminent, a small group of nations had quietly agreed to begin something they called the Vanguard Project. Publicly, it did not exist. Privately, it had drawn together some of the best minds and largest budgets on the planet, hidden inside a web of shell programs and classified defense spending that even most sitting presidents and prime ministers had only partial knowledge of. The heart of the project was a shipyard, built in secret over a decade near the orbit of Saturn, using materials and technology gathered from a strange discovery made 11 years earlier, when an automated probe sent to study Saturn's rings had stumbled upon the wreckage of a very old, very alien vessel, drifting silent and dead among the ice. The vessel had been ancient, destroyed long before humanity had even developed radio, but its hull, its systems, and fragments of its technology had given human engineers a leap forward no one could have predicted. It was not Kelvac's technology. It belonged to some other unknown species, one that had perhaps also once been judged, once been threatened, and had lost, long ago, leaving only wreckage behind as a warning that no one on Earth had understood until now. From that wreckage, and from 12 years of the hardest work in human history, Vanguard Station had grown. And now, in the days following Elena's broadcast, everything the project had built came out of hiding. Aboard the flagship of that hidden fleet, a vessel named Resolute, built from a strange fusion of alien alloy and human engineering, a woman named Captain Sarah Okonkwo stood on the bridge, watching as more and more ships arrived from across the solar system, gathering at the coordinates Elena had given to the stars. Some were sleek and new, built specifically at Vanguard Station using the alien technology. Others were older, human-made vessels, repurposed and reinforced, carrying crews who had trained for years for a moment they had never truly believed would come. "Report," Sarah said to her second-in-command, a broad-shouldered man named Diego Vasquez. 41 ships gathered so far, Captain, Diego said. 3 more expected within the hour. The rest of the fleet is still moving into position from the outer stations. And Vanguard Station itself? Fully operational. Defense grid is up. Shipyards are still producing, though slower than we'd like. We used almost everything we had building this first wave. Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes on the main view screen, where dozens of ships now floated against the pale rings of Saturn, small compared to the vastness of space around them, but more than humanity had ever gathered together in one place before. It was, she knew, still nowhere near enough to face an empire capable of building fleets in the tens of thousands. But it was something. It was proof that humanity had not simply thrown coordinates at the stars out of desperation and nothing else. "Do you think they'll actually come?" Diego asked quietly. "They'll come," Sarah said. "We insulted an empire that's conquered species for 4,000 years. Pride alone will bring them, even if logic tells them to wait." Back on Earth, the mood across the planet had shifted from panic into something stranger, something that felt almost like unity, though no one dared call it that too loudly, afraid of jinxing whatever fragile thing was holding the world together. News channels that had once argued over politics now broadcast the same images side by side, footage from orbit showing the growing fleet near Saturn, interviews with scientists explaining, as best they could, what humanity might be facing. Children in schools around the world were taught, almost overnight, new lessons about a threat from the stars, lessons no textbook had ever prepared for. In Geneva, Elena Cade barely slept. The days since her broadcast had blurred into a constant stream of meetings, briefings, and impossible decisions. She sat now in a smaller room than before, just herself, General Webb, and a woman named Dr. Amara Chen, the lead scientist behind much of the reverse-engineered alien technology that had made Vanguard Station possible. "Talk to me about the numbers," Elena said, rubbing her eyes. "Realistically, if they send everything they threatened, what happens?" Dr. Chen pulled up a display showing rough estimates gathered from the Kelvac ship's own transmissions, decoded and studied over the past several days. If the message is accurate, and if Kelvac's fleet sizes match historical patterns from what little data we've gathered, we could be facing anywhere from a few hundred ships to several thousand. Our fleet, even at full production from Vanguard Station, tops out at around 200 vessels within the next month. We are, by any conventional measure, badly outnumbered. "So we lose," General Webb said flatly. "Not necessarily," Dr. Chen said. "The alien wreck we recovered gave us more than just hull materials and drive technology. It gave us weapon schematics too, ones that don't match anything the Kelvac's message described. If our analysis is right, this species we found the wreckage of once fought a war against something like the Kelvac's empire, and lost, but not without inflicting real damage. There's a particular weapon system, something the ship's records call a resonance cascade, that seems designed specifically to disrupt the kind of shielding a large fleet like the Kelvac's would use. We've only just gotten it working in early prototype form." Elena leaned forward. "How many ships have it?" 6, Dr. Chen said. "So far." 6, Elena repeated. "Out of 200. It's early technology, Elena. We found the wreck 11 years ago. Most species take generations to properly understand alien engineering, and we did it in a decade because we had no choice. 6 working weapons is honestly closer to a miracle than a failure. The room fell quiet for a moment. General Webb finally spoke, his voice low. We're not going to win this by matching their numbers. We both know that. If this turns into a straight fight, ship for ship, gun for gun, we lose, and we lose badly, no matter what tricks Dr. Chen's people have found. So what do? Elena asked. We do what humanity has always done when facing a bigger enemy, Webb said. We don't fight fair. We use the terrain. We use surprise. We use everything they don't expect from a species they've already decided is primitive and predictable. Elena looked at the star map on the wall, the small cluster of ships gathered near Saturn's rings, and beyond it, the vast darkness of space where, somewhere, an Empire's fleet was likely already being summoned. Then let's make sure they walk into something they've never seen before, she said. Aboard the Kelvax scout ship, that same day, Marshal Threx's second fleet arrived at the edge of the system, a wall of warships stretching further than any single Kelvax officer could see with unaided eyes, gathering just beyond the orbit of Neptune, preparing for the final jump toward the coordinates humanity had given. Marshal Threx himself, a broad and heavily armored Kelvax with decades of conquest behind him, met with Vorashin aboard his flagship, a vessel large enough to hold a small city. 12,000 ships, Threx said, standing before a massive tactical display showing the human fleet gathered near Saturn, small and scattered by comparison. For this, a species that hasn't even mastered proper faster-than-light travel on their own. They found something, Vorashin said. Wreckage, likely from an older conflict. Their weapons and shielding show technology beyond their expected tier. It concerned the Council enough to authorize full deployment. Threx laughed, a low rumbling sound. Old wreckage does not win wars, Speaker. Numbers win wars. Discipline wins wars. This species has neither. They have gathered 200 ships to face 12,000. This will not be a battle. It will be a demonstration. Perhaps, Vorashin said quietly, though his black eyes remained fixed on the display, on the strange, defiant little fleet gathered near the rings of a distant planet, waiting. He thought of the message again, the words that had stayed with him since the moment he had first read them. Come and find us there, and bring everything you've got, because we intend to do the same. It was not the language of a species preparing to surrender once the fleet arrived. It was the language of a species that had already decided how this would end, and had chosen to meet that ending on its own terms, rather than someone else's. For the first time in 300 years of service to the Empire, Vorashin felt something he had not expected to feel, standing before a fleet of 12,000 warships. He felt uncertain. The order came 2 days later. The second fleet would move to the coordinates near Saturn, surround the human forces gathered there, and demand, one final time, an immediate and total surrender. If the humans refused this final chance, the fleet was authorized to destroy every ship in that fleet, and then move on to bombard the Earth itself into submission, a punishment reserved for species who dared to defy the Council after being given every opportunity to yield peacefully. Aboard the Resolute, Captain Sarah Okonkwo received the news of the approaching fleet from long-range sensors just past midnight, ship time. She stood on the bridge, watching as the numbers came in, growing larger and more terrifying with every passing minute, until finally, the full scale of what was coming became clear on the main display. 12,000 ships, a wall of light and steel unlike anything any human had ever imagined possible, moving steadily toward the small, gathered fleet near Saturn's rings. Diego Vasquez stood beside her, his face pale in the low light of the bridge. Captain, he said quietly, that's not an invasion force, that's an extinction event. Sarah did not look away from the display. Somewhere far below, on the surface of the Earth, billions of people were waking up to news broadcasts showing the same approaching fleet, watching, waiting, praying, in whatever way each of them knew how. Send word to Vanguard Station, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear tightening in her chest. Tell them it's time. Tell them everyone needs to be ready, because whatever happens next, This is the moment we've spent 12 years preparing for. She turned to the rest of the bridge crew, young men and women who had trained for years without truly believing this day would ever arrive, and found, somehow, the words to steady them. "They think this is a demonstration," she said. "They think we're going to see that fleet unfold. Let's show them exactly how wrong they are." Out in the black distance of space, the wall of Kelvac's warships continued its slow, unstoppable advance, closing the gap between Empire and Earth with every passing hour, while behind it, unseen and unheard by any Kelvac sensor, the wreckage of an older, forgotten war waited quietly within the hulls of humanity's newest ships, ready, for the first time in this galaxy's long history, to answer an Empire's threat not with surrender, but with everything humanity had. The Kelvac's second fleet took 4 days to cross the distance from the edge of the solar system to the rings of Saturn, moving in a formation so vast that human telescopes on Earth could track its approach for hours before it ever arrived, a slow-moving wall of light spreading wider across the night sky with every passing night. Across the planet, people gathered outdoors in numbers no one had seen in generations, standing in parks and streets and rooftops, staring up at a sky that no longer felt safe, watching for a fleet they could not yet see with their own eyes, but knew, somehow, was already there. Aboard the Resolute, Captain Sarah Okonkwo had not slept properly in 3 days. She stood on the bridge, watching the sensor display update every few minutes as the Kelvac's fleet drew closer, its numbers so large that the computer struggled at first to properly count them all. 12,043 ships, the final count read, once the fleet settled into position just beyond the edge of Saturn's ring system, close enough now that even unaided human eyes, aided only by the ship's viewports, could make out faint points of light where none had been before. "They're holding position," Diego Vasquez said from his station, not advancing further. "Looks like they're waiting." "For what?" asked a young lieutenant near the back of the bridge, a woman named Priya Anand who had, until 8 months ago, been flying commercial passenger shuttles between Earth and the Moon, before being recruited into the Vanguard project. "For us to surrender," Sarah said. "They gave us a chance before. They're giving us one more, probably, before they open fire. That's how these things tend to go, according to what little we've learned about them." Sure enough, within the hour, a transmission arrived, broadcast across every frequency human technology could detect, translated instantly by systems built around fragments of alien code recovered from the old wreckage. Vorashen's voice, cold and formal, filled the bridge of every human ship gathered near Saturn, and every screen on Earth that had been left tuned to the emergency channels. "You have gathered your ships in defiance of the Council's authority. This is your final opportunity. Surrender your fleet, your world, and your governments to Kelvac's authority immediately, and the Empire will show mercy in accordance with long-standing Council policy toward species who yield before battle is joined. Refuse, and every ship in this fleet, and every city on your world, will be destroyed without further warning." Sarah listened to the message in silence, her jaw tight. Around her, the bridge crew waited, watching her, waiting for her response, though the true response would not come from her alone. Word had already gone out across Earth's remaining governments, gathered together now under a single emergency council, formed in the days since Elena Cade's first broadcast, a council that included, for the first time in human history, representatives from nearly every nation on the planet, working with something close to a single purpose. In Geneva, Elena Cade sat before a camera once more, her hands steady this time, though her heart pounded harder than it ever had in her years as a fighter pilot. She had rehearsed nothing. There was nothing to rehearse. She simply spoke, and her words went out to the fleet, to the Kelvac ships waiting above, and to the entire population of Earth listening below. "We heard you the first time," she said. "Our answer hasn't changed." The transmission ended there. No further explanation, no plea, no attempt to soften the moment. Aboard the Kelvac's flagship, Marshal Threx watched the brief reply with something between disbelief and irritation, his heavy features twisting into a scowl. "They refuse again," he said. "Even now, staring down 12,000 ships, they refuse." Vorashen stood beside him, his black eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the small human fleet gathered near Vanguard Station, no more than 200 vessels against the overwhelming might arrayed against them. By any reasonable measure, this should already be over. And yet something in the way the humans held their position, calm and unmoving, despite facing certain destruction, unsettled him in a way he could not quite name. "Begin the approach," Threx ordered. "Full fleet advance. We will make an example swift enough that no other species in this region ever considers such foolishness again." The order rippled out across the Second Fleet, and slowly, terribly, the wall of Kelvax warships began to move forward, closing the last stretch of distance between Empire and Earth. Aboard the Resolute, Sarah Okonkwo received the sensor readings confirming the fleet's advance, and felt something settle in her chest, a strange, quiet calm that came, she realized, from finally reaching the moment they had spent 12 years preparing for, rather than simply waiting for it any longer. "Diego," she said, "signal Vanguard Station. Tell them it's time to activate the array." Diego's fingers moved quickly across his console, and moments later, a response came back, confirming the order had been received. Deep within Vanguard Station, hidden behind kilometers of asteroid rock and ice mined from Saturn's rings over 12 years of secret construction, engineers and technicians began powering up a system that had never before been tested against a real enemy, a system built entirely around the strange, alien technology recovered from the ancient wreckage, a system Dr. Amara Chen and her team called, simply, the Veil. The Veil was not a weapon. It was something stranger, something the alien wreckage's old records had only partially explained, even after over a decade of study. It was a field generator, capable of bending and scattering certain types of sensor and targeting systems across a wide area of space, creating pockets of distortion that made ships within its range difficult, though not impossible, to detect and target accurately. It would not stop the Kelvax fleet. It would not destroy a single enemy ship, but it would, if it worked as intended, buy humanity something it desperately needed against an enemy so vastly larger in numbers. It would buy confusion. As the Kelvax fleet continued its advance, closing the distance toward Saturn's rings, the Veil activated across the region of space surrounding Vanguard Station and the gathered human fleet, a vast, invisible field spreading out silently against the darkness. Aboard the Kelvax flagship, sensor officers began reporting strange readings almost immediately, readings that made no sense against anything in their long database of prior conquests. "Marshal," a sensor officer said, his voice tight with confusion, "our targeting systems are reporting inconsistent positions for the human fleet. Multiple ghost signals. We cannot get a clean lock on their exact formation." Threx frowned, leaning over the display. "Explain." "I cannot, Marshal. It is as though space itself around their fleet has become unreliable. Our long-range weapons will not be able to fire with full accuracy until we close to much shorter range." Vorashin, standing nearby, felt that same uncertain feeling from before return, stronger now. This was not the technology of a species still learning to build proper starships. This was something else, something recovered, he suspected, from a source far older and far more dangerous than the humans themselves. "Continue the advance," Threx said, after a moment. "Whatever trick this is, it will not matter once we are close enough. No sensor distortion protects a ship from a weapon fired point blank. Close the distance." The Kelvax fleet surged forward, faster now, 12,000 ships converging on the small human formation gathered near Vanguard Station, the vast distortion field of the Veil doing little to stop the advance, only slowing the moment when true, effective fire could begin. Aboard the Resolute, Sarah watched the enemy fleet close the distance on her display, her hands gripping the edge of her command chair. Distance to nearest enemy ships? 200,000 kilometers, and closing fast, Captain, Diego reported. At their current speed, they'll be within effective weapons range in under 6 minutes. Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes moving across the bridge, to the young faces of her crew, people who had trained for this moment for years, but had never truly faced anything like what was now bearing down on them. She thought of the 6 ships equipped with the resonance cascade weapon Dr. Chen's team had built, scattered now among the 200 vessels of the human fleet, each one carrying a weapon capable, in theory, of disrupting Kelvax shielding on a scale no one had ever tested in real combat. She thought, too, of General Webb's words from days earlier. "We don't fight fair. We use everything they don't expect. All ships, Sarah said, opening a channel to the entire human fleet. This is Captain Okonkwo aboard the Resolute. In a few minutes, that fleet is going to be close enough to try and end this in a single strike. We are not going to let them. Formation Hydra, as planned. Cascade ships, hold position at the center until my mark. Everyone else, spread wide, keep them guessing, and remember, they've never fought anything like us before. Let's remind them why that matters. Across the human fleet, 200 ships began to move, breaking from their tight defensive formation into something far more scattered and unpredictable. A pattern Dr. Chen's team, working alongside human military strategists, had spent months designing specifically to counter an enemy used to facing rigid, orderly resistance from species that fought the way the Kelvax expected them to fight. Aboard the Kelvax flagship, Marshal Threx watched the sudden, chaotic shift in the human formation with visible confusion. What are they doing? That is not a defensive formation. That is not any formation at all. Marshal, Vorashin said quietly, watching the same display. I do not believe they intend to fight the way we expect them to fight at all. Threx waved off the concern with a heavy hand. Numbers, Speaker. In the end, it always comes down to numbers. We have 60 ships for every one of theirs. However they choose to arrange themselves, that math does not change. The distance closed further. 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2. Aboard the Resolute, Sarah watched the countdown on her display, her heart pounding, the entire bridge silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems and the soft, steady beeping of the sensor array tracking the approaching wall of enemy ships. She thought, briefly, of the 12 years that had led to this moment, of the wreckage found drifting silent among Saturn's rings, of the secret shipyards built in the dark, of the millions of hours of work by scientists and engineers and soldiers who had never truly believed this day might come, and yet had prepared for it anyway, because that was what humanity did. It prepared. It endured. It refused to simply lie down and accept defeat before the fight had even begun. 1 minute to weapons range, Diego said, his voice tight. Sarah rose slowly from her command chair, her eyes fixed on the wall of enemy light filling the main view screen. 12,000 ships bearing down on a fleet a fraction of their size, carrying with it 4,000 years of unbroken conquest, and the absolute certainty that this battle, like every battle before it, was already decided. All ships, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the entire human fleet, steady despite everything. Stand by. Somewhere far below, on the surface of the Earth, billions of people watched the same approaching fleet, through whatever footage their governments could provide, holding their breath together as one world, waiting to see what would happen when an empire that had never lost a war finally met a species that had never known how to properly surrender. The countdown reached 0, and the battle for humanity's future began. The first shots came from the Kelvax fleet, a wave of energy fire so vast that, for a brief moment, it lit up the dark space around Saturn's rings like a false dawn. Aboard the Resolute, alarms blared as the ship's shields absorbed a glancing hit, the whole vessel shuddering under the impact. Shields at 82%, Diego called out. That was from long range. Direct hits are going to hurt a lot worse. Sarah gripped the arms of her command chair. Cascade ships? Status? Holding position at the center of the formation, Captain, Priya reported. Powering up the resonance array now. Dr. Chen says they need 40 more seconds before they can fire.
40 seconds.
In the middle of a battle against 12,000 ships, 40 seconds felt like an eternity. Sarah watched the tactical display as the scattered human fleet weaved through the incoming fire, the strange, unpredictable formation Dr. Chen's team had designed, making it harder for the Kelvax gunners to find clean shots, though not impossible. Already, 2 smaller human vessels had taken heavy damage, one venting atmosphere into the void, its crew scrambling toward escape pods. Aboard the Kelvax flagship, Marshal Threx watched the chaotic human formation with growing frustration. Why are our targeting solutions failing? These are primitive vessels. They should not be this difficult to strike. The distortion field, Marshal, a weapons officer reported. It is still active, even at this range. Combined with their erratic movement patterns, our automated systems are struggling to maintain accurate locks. Then target manually, Threx snapped. Concentrate fire on their largest vessels. Break their formation apart. The Kelvax fleet adjusted. Thousands of guns swinging toward the larger human ships scattered across the battle space, including the Resolute itself. Sarah felt the ship rock again as more fire found its mark, the shields dropping further with every impact. Shields at 60%, Diego called out. Cascade ships, 30 seconds to ready. They won't have 30 seconds if this keeps up, Priya said, her voice tight with fear she was fighting hard to control. Sarah made a decision in an instant, the kind of decision that came from years of flying combat aircraft, long before she had ever imagined commanding a starship. Diego, pull us toward the cascade formation. Draw their fire toward us. Everyone else, keep them spread thin. Captain, that means taking the brunt of their fire directly, Diego said. That's exactly the point, Sarah said. Do it. The Resolute banked hard, engines flaring, moving directly into the heart of the incoming Kelvax fire, drawing the attention of dozens of enemy gunners, who saw, correctly, that this was one of the larger human vessels in the fleet. Shields dropped further. Alarms screaming across the bridge, sparks bursting from an overloaded console near the rear of the room. But the ship held together, buying precious seconds for the 6 Cascade-equipped vessels gathered nearby to finish their charge. Cascade array ready, Priya called out finally, relief flooding her voice. Dr. Chen says they're online, Captain. Just say the word. Sarah's eyes fixed on the display, on the wall of Kelvax ships pressing closer, confident, certain of victory, utterly unprepared for what was about to happen. Fire, Sarah said. Across the human fleet, the 6 Cascade ships released their weapons simultaneously, a wave of strange, shimmering energy, unlike anything the Kelvax database had ever recorded, spreading outward in a pulse that raced across the battle space faster than any conventional weapon. It did not destroy ships outright. Instead, wherever it touched, Kelvax shields flickered and failed, entire sections of enemy vessels losing power in an instant, their weapons systems overloading, their sensors going dark. Aboard the Kelvax flagship, alarms erupted across every console at once. Marshal, we are losing shield integrity across nearly 40% of the fleet. Weapons systems failing on multiple vessels. We cannot explain the cause. Threx stared at the display in disbelief as ship after ship within the pulse's range went dark, their systems crashing under an effect no Kelvax engineer had ever encountered in 4,000 years of conquest. Impossible. What weapon does this? Vorashin, standing beside him, felt a cold certainty settle over him at last, the uncertainty from the past days finally resolving into understanding. The wreckage, he said quietly. They found more than hull plating and drive systems in that old wreck. They found a weapon built by whoever fought our kind before, long ago, and lost, but not before leaving something behind capable of hurting us. Reroute power, Threx bellowed. Bring shields back online. All ships, resume firing the moment systems recover. But the damage, though not permanent, had bought humanity exactly what it needed most in that moment: time and chaos, spreading through a fleet that had never once, in its long history, faced an enemy capable of striking back in a way it did not understand. Aboard the Resolute, the bridge crew watched the tactical display in stunned silence as nearly 5,000 Kelvax vessels went dark all at once, their formation breaking apart in confusion as automated defense systems failed and manual overrides scrambled to compensate. It worked, Diego said, disbelief plain in his voice. It actually worked. Don't celebrate yet, Sarah said, though even she felt a fierce, sudden hope rising in her chest. They'll recover. We need to press the advantage now, while we have it. All ships, target the disabled vessels. Concentrate fire on their command ships if you can find them. Move, move, move. The scattered human fleet surged forward, small, fast vessels darting between the massive, temporarily crippled Kelvax warships, striking at weak points with everything they had, torpedoes and rail-fired projectiles tearing into hulls that, moments before, had seemed utterly invulnerable. It was not a clean victory. Kelvax point defense systems, though weakened, still tore several human ships apart in the chaos, their crews lost in an instant to the void. But for the first time since the fleet had arrived, the battle no longer felt one-sided. Marshal Threx, watching his fleet's careful formation dissolve into chaos, felt something he had not felt in centuries of service. Real, genuine fear. How many ships have we lost? Confirmed destroyed. 312, Marshal, an officer reported, her voice shaking. Damaged and non-combat capable, estimated at over 4,000. Systems are recovering, but slowly. The humans are pressing their advantage. Bring every functional ship to bear, Threx ordered. I do not care about elegant tactics anymore. Overwhelm them with sheer weight of fire before they can strike again with whatever that weapon was. Slowly, painfully, the Kelvax fleet began to reorganize. Its vast numbers, even reduced and scattered, still overwhelming compared to the small human force pressing its advantage. Aboard the Resolute, Sarah watched as fresh waves of enemy fire began finding their marks again, human ships falling one by one as the numbers began, inevitably, to reassert themselves. "Captain," Diego said, his voice grim, "we can't keep this pace. We're down to 150 ships. Cascade weapons are recharging, but Dr. Chen says it'll be at least 20 minutes before they're ready to fire again." Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the terrible arithmetic of a battle that, despite the damage they had done, was still, by any measure, impossible to win outright. And yet, she thought of Elena's words from the very first broadcast, of General Webb's insistence that humanity had never known how to properly surrender, and she made her final decision of the battle. "Signal Vanguard Station," she said. "Tell them it's time for the last part of the plan. Tell them to fire the array." Deep within Vanguard Station, hidden behind the icy rings of Saturn, the final piece of humanity's 12-year secret project activated at last, a massive weapons platform built directly into the asteroid field itself, using the heaviest and most powerful components recovered from the ancient alien wreckage, a system too large and too power-hungry to fit aboard any single ship, requiring the entire station's reactor output to fire even once. It was not subtle. It was not clever. It was, simply, the single most powerful weapon humanity had ever built, aimed now directly at the heart of the reforming Kelvax fleet. The blast, when it came, was visible even from Earth, a brief, brilliant line of light cutting across the dark sky above the planet, gone in an instant, but leaving behind, in the space near Saturn's rings, a gap torn straight through the center of the Kelvax formation. Hundreds of ships destroyed outright in a single, devastating strike. Aboard the Kelvax flagship, which had, by sheer chance, been positioned at the very edge of the blast's fringe, alarms screamed as the ship rocked violently, systems failing across half the vessel. Marshal Threx was thrown from his position, catching himself against a console, staring in horror at the devastation displayed before him. "That is not possible," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "No species at their tier possesses a weapon of that magnitude." Forashin, badly shaken but still standing, looked at the display, at the ruin torn through the heart of a fleet that had never known true defeat, and understood, finally and completely, that everything he had believed about this war, about this species, had been wrong from the very beginning. "Marshal," he said quietly, "I believe it is time to consider whether this battle can still be won." Threx did not answer immediately. He simply stared at the display, at the wreckage of ships that had served the Empire faithfully for centuries, now scattered and burning in the dark, destroyed by a species his own reports had called primitive only days before. Aboard the Resolute, Sarah watched the devastation from Vanguard Station's strike with a strange, hollow feeling rising in her chest. Not quite triumph, not quite relief, but something closer to disbelief that the plan, the impossible, desperate plan, built over 12 secret years, had actually worked as intended. "Captain," Diego said softly, "Kelvax fleet is breaking formation. They're pulling back." Sarah closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing herself finally to breathe. "Confirm that, Diego. Confirm it twice." "Confirmed, Captain. The Kelvax fleet is retreating." A ragged cheer broke out across the bridge, quickly hushed by the enormity of what still remained. The wreckage scattered across the battle space, the human ships lost, the friends and crewmates who would not be returning home. Sarah allowed the crew their brief moment of relief, but her mind was already moving forward, toward the question that mattered most, now that the first battle had somehow, impossibly, ended in humanity's favor. The Empire had retreated, but an empire that had never lost a war in 4,000 years was not likely to simply accept defeat and walk away. Somewhere out among the stars, the Kelvax Council would soon learn what had happened here, and Sarah knew, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in her chest, that this battle, however extraordinary its outcome, was very likely only the beginning of something much larger still to come. The Kelvax Second Fleet withdrew to the edge of the solar system, gathering what remained of its shattered formation, nearly 400,000 kilometers from Saturn's rings, far beyond the reach of Vanguard Station's great weapon, though well within range of human sensors that tracked every remaining ship with quiet, careful attention. Of the 12,043 vessels that had arrived 4 days earlier, official Kelvax counts, intercepted and decoded by human intelligence teams working around the clock, placed the losses at just over 3,000 ships destroyed outright, with several thousand more damaged badly enough to require months of repair before they could fight again. It was not a total victory. Humanity had lost 83 ships of its own 200, along with the lives of nearly 9,000 men and women who had crewed them, a cost that Elena Cade, watching the casualty reports arrive in Geneva, felt in her chest like a physical weight she would carry for the rest of her life. But it was, by any honest measure, a victory no one, human or Kelvax, had believed possible only a week before. Aboard the Kelvax flagship, Marshal Threx sat alone in his private quarters for the first time since the battle had ended, staring at a data slate showing the final casualty figures, numbers that did not match anything in 4,000 years of Kelvax military history. No Empire fleet of this size had ever suffered losses like this against a species so far below it in technological tier. The pattern that had governed Kelvax conquest for centuries, the simple, absolute logic that had always guaranteed victory, had broken, here, against a small blue world that should have surrendered days ago. A quiet chime sounded at his door, and Vorashin entered, looking older somehow than he had only days before, his gray skin duller, his black eyes carrying a weight that had not been there when this mission first began. "The Council has been informed," Vorashin said. "They are displeased, to put it gently. There will be an inquiry into how a Tier 9 species inflicted losses of this magnitude on an Imperial fleet." Threx did not look up from the data slate. "What do they want us to do? Send the rest of the fleet? Bombard the planet from orbit and be done with this?" "They considered it," Vorashin said. "I argued against it." That made Threx look up. "Why?" Vorashin was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I do not believe bombardment would end this the way the Council imagines it would. This species does not fight the way we expect species to fight. They found ancient wreckage and built new weapons from it in 12 years. Weapons capable of disabling our shields on a scale we have never encountered. If we destroy their planet from orbit, we destroy the population, yes, but any survivors, any colonies they may have already established elsewhere that we do not yet know about, would carry forward a grudge against the Empire that could last centuries. And Marshal, I do not believe, after what I have seen here, that this is a grudge the Empire wants to carry. Not against a species willing to send coordinates in reply to a demand for surrender." Threx considered this for a long moment, the memory of his shattered fleet still fresh and raw. "Then what do you propose instead?" "Negotiation," Vorashin said. "Something the Empire has rarely bothered with, because it has rarely needed to. But this species has just proven it can hurt us badly enough to make the cost of conquest higher than the Council may wish to pay. I propose we offer them something closer to what we offer species who join the Council willingly, rather than through conquest. Provisional membership, limited trade rights, recognition of their sovereignty over their own world, in exchange for peace, and perhaps, in time, alliance." "The Council will call that weakness," Threx said quietly. "Perhaps," Vorashin said, "but I would rather be called weak by the Council than lose another 3,000 ships, proving a point that no longer needs proving. We know now what this species is capable of. I would prefer to learn what they might become, as something other than an enemy." Down on Earth, similar conversations were happening in Geneva, though from the opposite side of the same terrible arithmetic. In the underground command center where this had all begun, Elena Cade sat with General Webb and Dr. Amara Chen, reviewing the latest reports from Vanguard Station. "They're not advancing," General Webb said, tapping the display showing the Kelvax fleet's position at the edge of the system. 4 days now, just sitting there. That's not normal for a force that size, is it? According to what little we understand of Kelvax military doctrine, no, Dr. Chen said. A force that size either presses its advantage or withdraws entirely. Sitting still like this suggests indecision, maybe even internal disagreement about what to do next. Or it's a trap, General Webb said, waiting for reinforcements before they try again. Elena rubbed her tired eyes, looking at the star map that had become as familiar to her now as the borders of her own country once had been, back when countries had still felt like the most important lines in the world. We can't fight a war of attrition against an empire that size. We proved we can bloody their nose. We can't prove we can beat them outright, not if they decide to bring their full strength. So what do we do? Dr. Chen asked. Wait? No, Elena said. We do what we did the first time. We make the next move, instead of waiting for them to make it for us. 2 days later, a new transmission went out from Earth, broadcast not in the language of threat or defiance this time, but something closer to careful, deliberate diplomacy, crafted over long hours by Elena, General Webb, and a small team of the sharpest negotiators humanity's various governments could offer, none of whom had ever imagined they would spend their careers negotiating with an alien empire. We do not seek endless war with the Kelvax Empire, the message read, once translated into the Empire's own language using tools built from the ancient wreckage's recovered data. We defended our world because we were told to surrender everything we are, without discussion, without respect, without any attempt to understand what kind of species we might be. We are willing to discuss peace, on terms that recognize our right to govern ourselves, and our right to exist as we choose, rather than as your empire dictates. The response, when it came 3 days later, surprised nearly everyone who had expected either silence or renewed threat. It came not from Marshal Threx, but from Vor Ashen himself, requesting a formal meeting, to be held aboard a neutral vessel positioned exactly halfway between the human fleet and the withdrawn Kelvax force, a location that would, in the years that followed, become known across both human and Kelvax records simply as the Threshold. The meeting took place 11 days after the battle had ended, aboard a small, unarmed shuttle specially built for the occasion, carrying Elena Cade, General Webb, and a small honor guard of human soldiers who had fought in the battle themselves. Vor Ashen arrived aboard a similarly modest Kelvax vessel, accompanied by Dree and a handful of Kelvax officials sent by the Council to observe rather than command. A clear sign, Elena noted quietly to Webb, that the Empire had not fully decided how seriously to treat this negotiation. The talks that followed were long, careful, and often tense, stretching across nearly a full day of discussion, argument, and slow, hard-won compromise. But by the end of it, a framework had been agreed upon, one that would be refined over the months and years that followed, but which held, at its core, the same simple principle Elena had insisted upon from the very beginning. Earth would not surrender its sovereignty. The Kelvax Empire would not attempt further conquest. In exchange for peace, and for a formal, if cautious place at the edge of the wider galactic community, humanity agreed to limited trade and communication with the Empire, and, more importantly, with the Council above it, a body that had, according to Vor Ashen, taken great and unusual interest in the species that had done what no other species in 4,000 years of Kelvax history had ever managed to do. They had stood their ground and made an empire blink first. In the months that followed, Earth changed in ways no one could have fully predicted. Vanguard Station, once the planet's most closely guarded secret, became instead the foundation of something new, a public, if carefully managed, gateway between humanity and the wider galaxy beyond. Dr. Chen's research into the ancient wreckage continued, expanding now with careful, cautious cooperation from certain factions within the Kelvax Empire itself, factions led quietly by Vor Ashen, who had, in the strange way that war sometimes forges unlikely respect between former enemies, come to see something in humanity worth understanding, rather than simply conquering. Elena Cade found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, appointed as humanity's first official ambassador to the wider galactic community, a role she approached with the same steady determination that had carried her through the darkest days of the crisis, though she never quite lost the quiet weight of the 9,000 lives lost defending a fleet that, by every reasonable measure, should never have been able to stand against an empire's full might. On a quiet evening nearly a year after the battle, Elena stood once more before the great window of Vanguard Station, watching Saturn's rings stretch out below her, glittering faintly in the light of a distant sun. Captain Sarah Okonkwo stood beside her, both women older now in ways that had little to do with the passage of time. "Do you ever think about what would have happened," Sarah asked quietly, "if we'd surrendered instead? If we'd just given them what they wanted, the first time they asked?" Elena considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I think about it more than I'd like to admit," she said, "but I also think about what General Webb told me, right before we sent that first reply. He said, humanity never really knew how to surrender properly, even when it probably should have, 100 times throughout our history. I used to think that was one of our worst traits. Now I think it might be the thing that saved us." Far below, on the surface of the Earth, life had returned, slowly and carefully, to something resembling normal, though everyone alive during those first, terrifying days would carry the memory of them forever. The memory of a single alien ship arriving in silence, of a threat delivered without mercy, and of a reply sent back into the vast darkness of space, made not of surrender, but of coordinates, and courage, and the simple, stubborn refusal of a young and violent species to believe that its story was already over before it had even truly begun. The galaxy, wide and old and full of empires far older than humanity's brief and troubled history, had learned something new that year, something it would not soon forget. Earth had been threatened. Earth had been ordered to surrender, and Earth, small and outnumbered, and utterly unwilling to kneel, had simply, quietly, sent back the only answer it had ever truly known how to give. "Come and find out."